I'm going to just turn this on for a second, and if it gets really crazy, and Chris, you may have to share. Um, I'm going to go ahead and let you keep adding folks to the waiting room, though, Chris. So thank you for joining us, and we have put that in there a number of times. And I know that quite a few of you are from IU8 or work with us, so you may have filled out this survey. But if you don't mind, just give us some information about who you are and what you're up to. For most of you, I know you're pretty familiar. I've obviously already shut my video off, so you know you can shut your video off if you're having trouble with um, your screen at this point, or if you have low bandwidth, like Troy stated in the chat. Also, you can mute and unmute using your microphone. That's the number one that you see here. Hopefully, if you have anything to share, this is a small group. There's not a whole lot of us here. So if you'd like, please feel free to unmute like some of you have already done and join the conversation. I'm hoping that number three, the chat down there on the bottom right, will be active today. I have quite a few questions for you. Number four up there is the poll. It is a great feature that happens in Zoom, but it is not one that we are necessarily going to use today. So I'm going to just let that one go. So today's topic is teacher presence. And as you can see on our title page, just add you. And for each of you, whether you are an administrator, a teacher, your presence with your staff, your presence with your students is super important. So I just want to remember that that's our topic today. It's about keeping the value of the teacher, and it's Teacher Appreciation Week. So for all of you who are teachers, thank you for all the hard work you do. For those of us who started on this journey as teachers, we're still teachers at heart. And so I appreciate all of you and all the work you do. I've had a great opportunity during this pandemic to get opportunities to work with a lot of you and get to know you better. So teaching is just one of those amazing professions that I think is so undervalued. And I think a lot of those parents sitting at home with their children, trying to keep them engaged, really understand the difficulty of your job. So I hope you know that you're valued. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about teacher presence is because we really feel like during this time in the pandemic, there's been so many different ways that folks have had to engage with students that are new and sometimes difficult, that we wanted people to realize that video, and my video is still on, but video isn't the only way that we can interact. That creating a presence for you as a teacher, similar to what is happening in a brick and mortar environment, has possibility. So we wanted to talk a little bit about just the framework for teacher presence and why that's so important. And a while back when I was a high school principal, I did a study about why kids stay in school and rather than drop out. And the students that I studied were all students who were seen as at risk. So they were students who had low PSSA scores, they didn't come to school, they came from maybe a single parent family, they were a student of color or minority ethnicity. So they came from a lot of those different backgrounds. So they had all what was deemed characteristics of an at-risk student. And for the students who were on target to complete graduation at the end of their senior year that I studied them, the reason that they stayed in school was because they had a caring adult. And Vygotsky, in his research that many of us have built upon, says that the teacher is the most important agent. So the teacher and the student together create this symbiotic relationship where you really do orchestrate these great engaging interactions that do give students a sense of belonging. So there's this social construct that's so important that adults do by building relationships. And just like all the different people on the screen, the different teachers that you're seeing here, everybody comes to it a little bit differently, but that personality that you bring, that person that you bring to that classroom is what creates that social construct for learning to happen. So right now in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, just maybe putting the name of a teacher who really made that difference for you, somebody who made you feel like you belonged, like you were a part of that school or that classroom, or if you're a teacher, if you have somebody, if you're a parent, if you have a teacher who you know has made a difference in your child's life, just kind of like just want to lift those people up right now to kind of give a sense of who those people are in the chat. I'm just going to give you a second to do that before we move into the next piece there. All right, we're seeing lots of great stuff, telling stories. And what is it that, made that teacher so special? I'm seeing stories, I'm seeing first grade, all those early memories. Great, great. So lots of you can kind of really grab onto that person who made a difference for you. I know I had a coach when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and it was just such an amazing experience. Loved what she did and just created that love of learning in me. And I saw that I wasn't, the nerd I thought I was. I just love to learn. And so really got me into being a teacher. So teacher presence, what does it mean? We have this big influence as this slide tells you. So as we look at what teacher presence is, I think I skipped ahead here. Maybe not. Right, so if we look at what teacher presence is and what it means, I'm just wondering if you have a sense of what that definition might be, or what that is. If you want to kind of jump back into the chat room for a few seconds. You guys had some great responses there. I still love seeing all these different interactions about your teachers, but what does it look like? What is teacher presence? Can you get a definition or a few words that talk about what it looks like?
Well, people are responding there. I just thought it was interesting that a lot of the qualities people mentioned about their favorite teacher were common among the responses. So like calm, listening, patient. Yeah, it seemed like those qualities came up a few times. Not just busy work. Yeah.
Yeah, so really I think, Chris, yeah, that's a great point, because when we do think about the teachers, we can kind of remember the grade, we can remember inspiring. I love that word. And I think like teacher presence is that kind of magic dust that each of us has in our passion. Yeah, Nicole, really listening to your students, like really, I think that's some of that listening. And I think that one of the things we really want to talk about, and Chris, I know you've been doing teacher professional development for a long time, and you were one of the people who made me first aware of that value of teacher presence in the online and how that translates. So I don't know if you want to add anything in this spot here before we kind of dig in a little deeper to some of the things that teacher presence embodies.
I just see the last comment there is about how, we usually are so adept at being present in the physical classrooms because it's concrete. You can see it, you can hear it, it's all right there. And I think probably if you've been connecting with your kids over the last 6 or 8 weeks, you are very present virtually, and it can be as strong as the face-to-face. It's just different. And it's probably things that you're already doing, like messaging them, or the Zooms, but it doesn't just have to be Zooms. But I think the key is being there as a resource for them and reaching out to them. And that's what makes a presence, whether you're virtual or face-to-face.
That's so true, Chris. And Leonard was talking about Vygotsky, and I just have saying that was really big with ESL kids. And I really do think that connection was something that I really learned over the last 8 years, being having a virtual presence myself, and thinking about some of the relationships I've been able to develop with people like you, and other colleagues, as well as the teachers, like I know Ellen and Teresa are both in here today. And, I feel like I've developed really, really great relationships, although I've seen them very few times in a face-to-face environment. And it takes work and it's exhausting. And I feel like the virtual presence right now is probably feeling even more exhausting than usual. Like you talked about coming into the room today where you are, jumping from one Zoom meeting to the next. And it takes a lot of energy to get ready. Like I know for me, it's like you're on TV. So there's this whole other piece about being in this environment that is a little bit nerve-wracking. But I think as we move through here and we delve a little bit further into teacher presence, we have to think about our definition of a teacher. And I have two definitions here. And I don't know if you want to use any of the tools or if you want in the chat, but there's two different definitions of teachers that kind of popped up as I was preparing. And some of us may be more like teacher one and some of us may be more like teacher two. Can you identify which one you feel like you are more aligned with as you take a look at this definition? And I wonder as I look at this definition too, if you're an elementary person, you feel like one of these definitions is more attuned to you, and if you're a secondary, because sometimes having been an elementary principal and a secondary principal and also working at the district level, I tended to see different kinds of characteristics in people at the different levels around their teaching. And some of that makes a difference as well. Take a quick look at the chat here. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of both. Yeah, so true. I think they're both. We have to attend to people's needs, and we have to think about some of those more formal settings. So we're going to move in and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we can do to create a sense of belonging, which is so important as we go back. And Leonard and I both, I think, have just a real heart for Vygotsky's research. So some of the things that can create a sense of belonging is just having kids see your face. So that sense of belonging where the teacher's the binding element, like you're the one who kind of brings those kids together. And that's a lot different, I think. And that was one of the things that I had to learn a little bit about as I entered the virtual space and started being an administrator and working with teachers. So I think that discussion boards are a great place to do that. And I think in this discussion board, it's probably a little hard to see, but the students were watching Spanish news and they had to, and so they were listening to it in Spanish. And what they were really doing is trying to pick out words they understood. And so some students might have heard some words and other students might have heard other words. So as they were going in and responding to each other, they would be like, oh, maybe I didn't hear that word, but here's some words I heard in Spanish. And so they're able to go back and forth with their peers. So you're creating kind of that binding among the students. So a teacher could go in then and say, okay, that's great. Some of you heard these words, some of you heard those words. You've gotten most of the vocabulary words in this video, and maybe even some the teacher didn't get. So the teacher can add, some compliments and some positives right there, really letting kids know that they're seeing in a different way because they're not seeing them or they're not seeing your smile or you're not being able to give them kind of a pat on the shoulder and say, great job, or even see a thumbs up. The other piece is creating that sense of belonging, them seeing you. And this is just a way one of our teachers, Olivia, was able to create something so her students could hear her voice. She could say, here's a picture of me. Here's, she showed her Bitmoji of herself, what she sounds like in the 3 different languages she taught. So she teaches German, Spanish, and Arabic. So she had her voice in each of those languages. So there's just lots of tools out there, and we do have a lot of resources on our Extended Campus homepage. And so I think that some of those things are available to you, and we will have lots of those links in this slide deck for you as we move through. So Chris, do you have any other tools that, right off the top of your head that you would add, or do any of you have tools that you've used so far or over the last 6 or 8 weeks that you've used to create a sense of belonging?
Yeah, I think what I would add is that I know a big emphasis in the last month or so has been in Zoom and using Zoom, and it's awesome because you're able to actually see body language and talk and communicate a little bit more naturally with kids than through text-based messaging. But it doesn't always have to be a Zoom live recording. It's great if you can, but there are other ways to be present as well, like Pat said. It might be through a Flipgrid activity, if you've ever tried out Flipgrid, where people can post video responses. Or it could be a Padlet board, where you ask a question and each student adds tacks a sticky note to that board with a video of themselves or a photo of themselves, or their Bitmoji if they're uncomfortable showing their real self. And so even on a document, a plain old document, students could post a profile, set up a profile about themselves and share it in the discussion board. And most of your tools and platforms you're probably already using have a way to have a discussion where students can interact with one another in a moderated way. In Google Classroom, you can pose questions and allow them to respond. In a learning management system, you can have actual discussion boards where they post and reply. But it's a big thing for them to just know that there's humans behind the screen. It just doesn't always have to be done by video.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think that's one of the things I'm really trying to point out here. And while we do a lot of video in the world of learning, we also use a lot of interactive activities, and we use an LMS, so we use Canvas, so you can see that here in this example. But one of the other tools that some of our teachers like, because you don't necessarily want to give your kids your phone number, but you can use Google Voice, and I know there's some resources out there in our Extended Campus webpage that you can actually see if that's a tool that you think you can do. So lots of those tools are there to really help you build relationships. And here's some other, those authentic, meaningful experiences that we highlighted in the beginning. And there are so many things out there. I think one of the things that happened when we flipped into this virtual space is people just felt like, oh my gosh, I didn't have time to grab my books. I didn't have time to grab these resources, or the kids have all their books back at school. There are a lot of people who have been working in the virtual world for a long time. And so there are a lot of really good curated resources out there. The IU itself has created, and I have the OER Commons picture here, the IU has created its own set of their learning experiences there. And I think there's about, maybe almost 200 that are in there, and they're reading, math, literature, elementary, secondary. There's some science things in there. So, we have a lot of basic activities and problem-based learning modules that you can use with your students. There's ways to provide choice, like how you can provide choice among your students. And then some hyperlink documents. Here, there's some collections of these for a variety of different ways that you can use, all kinds of hyperlinks and documents that are here. I mean, if I just even open one of these right now and show you, there are just, templates and self-paced training and substitute teacher hyperdocs, and this just goes on and on. Like, so variety wakelets and just different people who have shared their resources out. So that's just one, and that's on Google Sites. There's English Language Arts Padlet here that I looked at. This is just unbelievable. This is one that somebody curated, and it's a Better Together. So as this loads up, you'll see there are just hundreds of examples of English language arts activities that people have posted in here, and they're all titled and themed. So you can take a look at just this large number of resources that's out there that's available, that you don't have to feel like you have to go out and meet every single activity, that there's some things out there that you can use and you can adapt for your students. These are all ways that you can create that meaningful, authentic experience for your students in a virtual world. And lastly, this is kind of the last thing I have out there. And then we can kind of open it up for discussion, but we really want to monitor the collaboration and as we try to support and extend the learning. So some of the ways that we can do that is really giving regular and swift feedback. The other is having kids collaborate. And I wanted to pop up this video because I think it was just a really great example. One of our teachers gave the students an assignment that they had to speak. They had to use the Spanish language and speak. So 3 of the students who are virtual students connected with each other, and they got together and they created a podcast. They're level 1 students, so it's kind of cute, and they're at that fun and funky age. So I'm just going to show you a few minutes before of this video, not even probably a few minutes, but just enough for you to see that the kids created this, and this young man is just super, super expressive. So this is the video.
Hola, hoy en nuestro podcast de español vamos a hablar de extrañamos o
de menos.
De escuela. Y
Escuela.
sí. Kendall, ¿qué cosas extrañas de escuela? Ver Michelle Roscoe cada día. Sí.
No. Miranda en español, cuando ella dice
sí.
choose.
Choose.
Sí, yo echo de menos a Miranda.
Sí, o cuando ella, no sé cómo se dice bully, pero cuando ella nos bully.
So, so this is just an example of students interacting with each other. And obviously these students have resources and they are really capable, of having this conversation. But this is, a full year of Spanish. They've had a full year of Spanish. And you can see that the teacher came back and said to them, this is good. And, they kept talking about wanting to do a podcast, but she told them they had to be more formal. They had to, kind of have more of a regular support out there so that they could make it a little bit more professional. So she told them that, the next step, if they really wanted to do something like this, would be to get a format. And she gave them, some suggestions about how they could be more prepared and have some questions ready, and that they would answer those questions, they could review them. But you could see that they did this all in Spanish, which was kind of the point of what they were doing there. So some of the things that I'm seeing here is those sway messages, and I think I'm seeing that there's a lot in the chat. So Chris, do you want to kind of bring me up to speed? This is awesome to see so much going on there.
Yeah, we just had some folks sharing how they connect and, things that they do just to establish that connection. Like Teresa said, she does a lot through email, and that might be true for others of you too. So she gets a lot of things turned in by email, and that's through a parent's email. So when she responds to them, she responds as though she's talking to the student, so that the student feels that the connection is there. And then I just shared that, one of the other things Pat's teachers do is send a weekly message. They use Sway to do that, which is a Microsoft tool that allows you to build these interactive letters. But there are other tools that you could use to do that, like S'more. If you've ever experimented with S'more, it's very similar. And it's one of those, there's a free version of that out there. But, ways that you can connect with students, even just routinely. It could be as simple as an announcement that you post, or an email that you send, or a phone call that you make, which someone else shared that they still write letters and use the phone. So just more ways to connect. Marcy says she's using Zoom and Seesaw, which if you're not familiar with Seesaw, Seesaw is like a communication and portfolio platform that connects students and parents and teachers really well. It's not as full featured as a Google Classroom or as a learning management system like Canvas, but it is great for communication, quick communication.
Yeah,
So I'm just looking down through.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you don't have the chat open, I would definitely open it because there's people sharing there. Do any of you have a tool that we haven't talked about that you have used to connect with your students or to let them know that you're there, besides ones that we've mentioned? Feel free to add it in.
Yeah, and Brenda, Brenda, do you have some things you've done a lot with Google Classroom and some of the tools, and I'm just not as familiar with some of those. You know, are there any other things in Google Classroom that that would help with some of these things that we're talking about, like deadlines and checking those submissions daily, and you know, providing the positive feedback?
Sure, I've seen teachers using the question feature in Google Classroom to keep up that connection, like a weekly, every Monday you post, you know, what's something, I don't have a good example because you're not really going to say what to do this weekend, but, you know, kind of like a would you rather, or just to keep the kids engaged. And Google Slides just allows for so much creativity and what people are doing with that. So I think there's just a lot of value with what everybody is mentioning on here.
Yeah, I saw a really good Google Slides suggestion by somebody on Twitter. And what they do is they send a Google slide deck out to all their students. And then every day or every week, whatever the frequency is, they just add a new slide to the top. So that's the way that they send messages. Now the link never changes. So the students just always have access to that Google slide deck. And there's a whole history of the communication that's happened. I mean, that's sort of one way, unless you ask them to do something on those slides, but at least it's a way to get some messages out, and it's easy because they don't have to go digging or looking. It's always in the same place. I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, I'm actually getting that from one of my daughter's teachers. It's a Google slide deck that she just adds to once or twice a week.
Yeah, that's nice. Now, does your daughter have to do anything in return on that deck, or is that just for the messages out?
It's for me to help her do some things.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I thought
but that's
was
a great way
solution.
for you. Yeah, I really like that, and I like that. I like that there's just a lot of ways out there, and I think one of the things that Chris, you and Brenda were both talking about is that consistency. And I think part of teacher presence is really being that consistent presence. Like if we bring this kind of all back around, you know, those things, like Teresa's saying, she does a weekly brain game through Zoom. So they're able, if they can come in live and do that. And Teresa, I think that's a great point, because those informal kinds of things that we do, there are also learning activities. Some of our world language teachers have hosted like short 20-minute coffee breaks like every day. And so they show up just once a day, because a lot of times the language isn't getting space in the regular school day right now. So rather than, you know, try to figure out when kids are going to be available, it really does give students the time to come in and practice their language skills, get their questions answered, but she just does it in a coffee break style. You know, sometimes they read a book in the target language, you know, a children's book, so family members can participate and other things like that. So ways that we can find to get to know our students in the virtual environment. I think one of the other big questions that has come about for folks, and I don't know if any of you guys are experiencing this anxiety, or the teachers who work with you are experiencing this anxiety, but the idea of what if it's not the same, what if we don't enter school the same way as we did in the previous year? Am I going to be able to build those relationships? Like, how are these kids going to respond to me if they don't even know me? And, you know, Ellen and Michio, I may put you on the spot because I know you're both in the room, but Ellen and Michio have both been teaching online for a long time and have built relationships with kids, having never met them face to face, and using a lot of these tools. So your presence can be felt regardless. And I don't know if either of you want to speak to that at all before we kind of close the floor here today.
I'm glad you knew that was Michio because I couldn't read her name.
I can't read her name either, but I know her Bitmoji, so I don't know if she's there. And I don't know if Ellen's still here, but I think that is, oh, that's okay. It's okay, Michio. It's okay, Michio. I know who you are. Yeah, so I think the idea of lots of these ways to demonstrate teacher presence and to have your ability to create those relationships with students, it's different. And it's certainly, as we say in the world of learning, you know, it doesn't replace, it's not the best thing, but it is the next best thing if it's not possible to be able to be with your students and to try and find ways to create relationships. And I think it is one of those things that really does, there are those ways to really grow and build your relationships with the students, which, you know, in turn helps them to learn.
So Pat, another one that we had talked about earlier this week that we're seeing a lot of teachers do is the whole flat Stanley concept.
Oh yeah. We had talked about that.
Maybe you've seen some of the, maybe you've all seen some of those where, you know, a teacher sends the student a flat version of themselves, maybe their Bitmoji printed out, or they send the student a file of their Bitmoji or their picture on a page that the student can print. And then the student takes a picture of them doing something with their teacher being present, but it's the flat version of their teacher. So it's been pretty cool to see where all these, you know, what all these kids are doing and sharing and how they're positioning themselves in these pictures with their flat teacher. It's been really cool. And didn't you have a niece or something that was doing that?
Oh yeah. I had a niece who, I saw on social media, she had her flat Mrs. Hall, I think it was. And she was showing Mrs. Hall how she was doing her Legos. She's a first grader. And so she had flat Mrs. Hall. That was the first time I had seen it. It was about 2 weeks ago, and seen some other ones pop up. I think you said Brian O'Black, one of our former colleagues that we worked with. He's a principal and he's showing his kids what he's doing. So I think that it's, you know, it is really interesting. One of our other teachers was telling me the other day that they have kids take a picture of what the weather's like where they are. And obviously some of our World of Learning students are all over the place. So, but they take a picture of the weather and then they share that picture of the weather. So like was some of you do like a morning routine with the elementary students. In languages, we do some of the same thing. We create those routines because it's learning a new language, just like you're learning to read. And so, you know, or acquiring language just like a preschooler would acquire language. So I think it's really great to think about the kinds of routines you have in your regular classroom and how you can potentially establish those same routines, because those routines create a comfort level. You know, you still want to create those guidelines for your class and all those other things that are super valuable.
And we're going to dig in on Thursday. I'm going to do a session about screencasting, which is making videos and capturing your screen. And so, you know, that's just an example of one way that you can, you know, establish your presence and be there and show that you're there. And so if you're interested in learning how to screencast, or if you have before and you just want to get some ideas, then you can join us again on Thursday at noon, and it'll be all about screencasting using different tools. I'll compare some different ones and give you a chance to try them out. Just pausing to read the chat here. Feel free to add any other comments or questions there. Yeah, that's a good point. It's really hard if you're working with a group of students that is resistant to engaging or connecting, and the challenges that poses. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the hardest parts because it's super hard to have a structure from home. Many of you all have probably noticed the difference in your own working environment. And, you know, even for me I work from home all the time, but now that everybody's working from home, and there's 3 of us in the house that are trying to manage video and manage, manage just even the noise level in different spaces at different times. It makes it really difficult. So I think obviously it's one of those pieces that this new normal here isn't really, and I was just reading an article, this isn't really a typical online education experience. We're all doing the best we can in these really difficult and different circumstances. And it's hard for us to reach through. Like, we do work with some students who are from some different cyber schools who have disconnected from the regular brick and mortar and gone to cyber schools. And some of those students are really difficult. Same as you were talking about earlier, Jody, in the chat. And so we see that difficulty in engaging them. So you do as much messaging as you can, and you do the best you can. And I think that, Mishia would tell you she's worked with some of those students too, just like you. And one of the things I always say to them is, if you break through to one student, if you have one student and you don't know that message, like if you go back to that meme that we put out there, I've been doing this a long time, and I went out to dinner one night. Student's probably 45 herself now, so I've been teaching for a long time, and she came up to me and she said, when you did this one thing when I was playing basketball and you called me out and you lifted me up, she said, it changed my whole life. It made me feel so valuable. Now, I hadn't seen that student probably for 20 years. And, you just don't know. We don't know, like, our messages that we send out, we may not ever hear a response, but our presence, we talked about teacher, this is all about teacher presence. And as teachers, that's probably one of the hardest parts of our jobs. We never, ever know on the other end if we're making a difference or not. It's sometimes those kids who need us the most, they are the ones who, they see the messages and they come through. And I think that it's really hard. And some of their parents, same thing. I think they're doing the best they can, Nicole, like you say. But they can't get their kids to work either. I mean, I remember having parents call me when I was a principal and say, will you talk to my kid? I can't get them to do anything. So it's really hard. It's really, really hard, and we need each other. So if you don't have any other questions, we'll be glad to hang around for a little while. And we're just glad to be able to help anybody out we can. And we're thankful for the suggestions that you bring, because I think learning from each other is also something that I've learned a lot from in this situation. We've been doing virtual learning for a long time, but some of the tools and strategies that you all are using and your departments are using are things that we've gotten to interact with now because we get to see you more. So thanks, everybody.
So the recording of this session and the slides will both be available on the Extended Campus website after the video finishes processing. I'll put that link in the chat area just so that you have it. But you can check back there, and that's also where you can hook up with our future webinars or any of our past ones.
Yeah, and if any of you all know, I do on the slides, I do have a link. The World of Learning is going to hold some summer programs this summer. So if anybody knows any students who need something to do, that link will also be in there. And you can also go to the World of Learning events page. And that is all there. So we have 3 different programs, one for elementary, one just for chatting, like those 3 students were doing that I was showing you in the video, and then one other for kids to kind of accelerate their world language learning. So have a great day. I hope you all enjoy it. It's been nice out where I live. Looks sunny in most of your backgrounds.